This episode is brought to you in part by Museum of the Bible and its new worship experience, All Creation Sings, made in partnership with Creator. Step into an immersive room with vibrant visuals, soundscapes of praise, and interactive displays illuminating the story of worship. Get tickets at museumofthebible.org/ACS.
Welcome to the Grace Enough podcast. I am your host, Amber Cullum. Today's guest was also featured in episode 15, but a lot has changed for the both of us during the last 4 years. Molly Stillman is now a published author, recently releasing her memoir, If I Don't Laugh, I'll Cry. Today, we discuss the impact losing her mother at age 17 had and continues to have on her life. The reckless life that she led as a young adult. The shame she experienced over squandering $250,000. And how Jesus changed everything. It's a candid conversation that I ask you to share with your friends. As I've said before, one of the greatest compliments you can give me as a podcaster is sharing these conversations with your friends. Whether it's in face-to-face conversations, on social media, via text message, or email. It is an absolute honor to have you listening and sharing with your friends. Good morning, Molly, and welcome to the Grace Enough podcast.
Amber, I'm so excited to be here. Like I was telling you, it just feels like I'm getting to hang out with an old friend. So thank you for having me. I'm so pumped.
You're welcome. We should be doing this probably in person, but I don't know. I'm not brave enough. I still have not taken that leap. Have you?
Yeah, it's so fun. It's so fun. I love doing in-person interviews.
Yeah. Anyways, we were already talking about all my issues. I'm an old lady now. So I'm set in my ways, my old lady ways.
It's totally fine.
And I don't want to change anything, but we're not here to talk about that. So,
no, I love it.
Well, what people may not know is you were the guest on my 15th episode, which is crazy to think about now. I know, because it doesn't feel like that long ago.
No.
But that was like pre-pandemic.
Pre-pandemic, a whole lot of life has happened.
Praise God.
Yeah.
We survived.
I know. We really did. Yeah, I know. You and I have both been at this a while. So
you longer than me.
Fun. It's so fun. I just love it so much. And I know. It's crazy. I was thinking about that the other day. I was like, this was like pre-pandemic I was on here.
I know. It feels like a lifetime ago, but a lot has happened since then. Not only have we survived a pandemic, but you are a traditionally published author. You've got your own farm now. You're church planting. What the heck?
I know. I know.
So where we're going to begin then is your book, If I Don't Laugh, I'll Cry, is about to be put into the world. And so I want to know, what's something in the book that you've written that you would say really encapsulates a lot of what's happened in the last 5 years in your faith journey and your family journey, all the things?
Oh man, that's a deep question. Well, that's such a good question because writing this book has been such a long journey. It's funny. I've had so many people now ask me, like, oh, I've always wanted to write a book. And I'm like, look, if you want to do it, do it. But you gotta
be committed
because it will chew you up and it will spit you out. And it is so fun and it is so brutal. And then people are like, do you have another one in you? And I'm like, can I get through the first one?
It's like once you have your first baby and then they're like, when are you having your second? And you're like, are you flipping kidding me?
I know. I'm like, I just am learning how to nurse. Yeah. So, but what's interesting about this book in particular is the first really 80% of the book takes place prior, from birth till the age of 25.
Yeah.
And for perspective, I'm 38. It's really only the last couple chapters that I kind of wrap up, where am I since then? Because from a more technical standpoint, I really struggled with I felt like, okay, well, I feel like I would wrap the book up real quickly. And I was like, do I go more in depth like over the last 15 years. And I was like, but really that's not what this book is about.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I did that pretty intentionally. Because I was like, I think it was more, I needed to like set up how I got to where I am now.
Yeah.
And that was really the first, because otherwise it would have really felt like two books. But all that being said, to answer your question, I actually would say it's the last chapter is really special to me. I haven't really talked about this like at all. And so I like sharing this. So my whole goal in writing this book was, I wanted to share my testimony in a unique way because it's a pretty unique story, but I really was writing it for kind of two groups of people. One, I was writing it for people who don't know the Lord. And I wanted the ability to really openly, honestly, and vulnerably share the junk in my life so that I earn the right to, by the end of the book, share the gospel.
Yep.
And I joked with my editor. I was like, I really want the end of the book to be just a punch you in the face gospel message. That is like the actual words I used. I was like, I want people to be able to close the book and have there be no question as to like the gospel. And then the second group of people I wrote it for was obviously like believers who maybe want to just see a different perspective on the way people come to faith or just seeing their own brokenness. Because it is my story, but I've shared this before. Like it's all of our stories. Like we're all broken. We all make mistakes. Like we all do dumb stuff. We all go through suffering and grief and all of that. And so but what do we do with it on the other side? And so the last chapter really is like the button on the whole book. But I felt as I was writing, like I felt this pressure with the last chapter because I was like, this is the most important to me. Like, this is really what do I want to leave people with? And my manuscript was due on January 13th of 2023. And January 12th, I still had not written the last chapter. So maybe this is a lesson in either like procrastination or I don't know. But it was partly like the words were not there yet. And I was really stressed out about it. And my husband was like, what are you going to do? Like, are you just going to stay up all night and like finish this? And I was like, no, like, I'm just really trusting and believing that the Lord is going to give me the words. And he's like, okay. And so that Thursday morning, I went to Bible study, but to BSF.
Yeah.
And last year we were neck deep in the Old Testament. And during the lecture that morning, my teaching leader just said this one kind of like, probably to her, like a throwaway line. It was like 4 words, 5 words, something like that. And she said this one line and it was like the Shekinah glory, like, or something like came down and it was like, oh, and I knew in that moment, I was like, I know what I need to write. And so I went to like discussion group and then I went home and I just walked in the house. I didn't even say anything to my husband. He was sitting and I was like, I gotta go. I gotta write. And I sat down at my computer and I kid you not, Amber, the words just flowed out. And I wrote the entire chapter in an hour and a half. And I knew, awesome. I was like, that's it. And I sent it to my husband. I was like, tell me what you think. And I got there and he has like tears streaming down his face. And he was like, that's it. And crazy enough, it's the chapter that had almost no edits. I edited almost nothing in that chapter through like 9 rounds of edits.
Isn't that crazy? Like there are these certain moments where it's hard to explain if somebody hasn't experienced them, but there's only been 2 times in my life where I really can say like God completely downloaded something to me.
Yes, 100%.
And there was there literally was no explanation because I've sit down, let's say it's to write or to speak or whatever it is to do it before and it would not come.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden it's just like, bleh, and it all comes. I mean, it's amazing.
It's amazing. It was the coolest thing. And what was such a cool experience about it, and what I still love about it is like, yes, they're my words, but also like, it is 100% like it was the work of the Holy Spirit. And like, I can say that without a shadow of a doubt, that they were not, they were from God. And I don't say that in like a hyper spiritualized way, but it just in like other chapters took me days and days and days.
It's a humble way, really.
Yes. When you're just like, man, you get to that point that is like, full reliance on him and just going, Lord, I cannot do this without you. And I mean, I think we can apply that to so many things in life when we get to that certain point, whatever whatever the task is in front of us, whether it's, in a relationship, in your parenting, in your marriage, in your work task, in something in church. Like when you get to a point where you are just like, Lord, I cannot do this without you. And you in that like full surrender moment, whatever it is, man, it's so cool when you get to the other side of it and you go, man, God did that. That's so awesome.
That's incredible. Oh, so see, everyone listening, if you read, make it to the end.
You
it's
gotta
the
get
cliffhanger.
To the end. It's the cliffhanger. You got to get to the end. You got to get to the end.
That's right.
This episode is brought to you in part by Beyond Ordinary Women Ministries, which prepares Christian women for leadership. At BOW, we believe that every woman is a leader because she influences someone. So, whom do you influence? Do you mentor a woman? Serve in the workplace? Or do you lead a small group, teach the Bible, or even lead an entire ministry? No matter who or how many you influence, our free online resources will help equip you. Our videos, podcast episodes, and articles from experienced women leaders will encourage you and perfect your leadership skills. They offer wisdom for dealing with ministry pitfalls, current biblical issues, health for your own soul, and insights for shepherding others well. In addition, BOW offers Bible studies designed to connect women of multiple generations. They provide a challenge to both women new to the Bible and those wanting to dig deeper. Be our guest and browse all of our free resources and low-cost Bible studies at beyondordinarywomen.org.
Well, this is not, I feel like it's a sharp turn, but it's totally a huge part of your story. And that is losing your mom at the age of 17. You were 17, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I mean, the reality is that significantly shaped your life as it would shape anyone's life. And so share some of the ways maybe that really impacted you at that young age and how you feel like growing into young adulthood, maybe some of the difficult impacts of that, but then also some of the positive things, not of losing her, but of the ways that you grew.
It is the single, at least in my life, and I'm sure most people who have had a significant loss like that would say the same thing. It is the single most defining event in my life because it is what, and I'm not saying that like if she hadn't died at a different point, like maybe it would have, but just because it was such a pivotal point in my life.
Yeah.
So she'd gotten sick when I was 9. And so from the ages of 9 to 17, like I'm going through those formative years of my life with a chronically ill parent, really not knowing that she could die any moment, even though my parents knew that, but they kept kind of that detail from me. And so her death, like, was sudden, but it wasn't to my dad and my mom. And so it really set my life on a trajectory of kind of accelerated towards rock bottom. I'm sure that I would have probably hit rock bottom some other way. Like, cause I didn't know the Lord throughout this time, but I mean, when she died, like just to give you like some perspective. So it was a Thursday night, like Friday morning. She died in the middle of the night in our home.
Were you a senior in high school at this point? Because you were 17?
I was a senior in high school. So November of my senior year. So she dies in the middle of the night, like, paramedics come, like all that stuff. This is all, between the hours of like 1:30 in the morning to like, I think by the time that they actually like the paramedics left the house with her body was like probably around 3:30 or so. And I obviously wasn't going to sleep at that point. And like for perspective, like once, because we had called like friends and some people to come over in the middle of the night and they did. But then like once they all left and it was like this quiet house, that aftermath, like it's just me and my dad in the house now. And we didn't speak to each other. And I just in a like, I don't really know how to describe it, almost like a drunken haze. I just was like, I looked at the time and I was like, well, I guess I got to go to school now. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
And so I got in my car. I didn't shower. Like I just got in my car and I didn't have my backpack. I just kind of drove to school in a haze. I pull in the parking lot and then I walk in the school And I remember like the senior assistant principal sees me in the hallway and like intercepts me. And I'm just kind of like, again, walking in this, I'm not crying. It's just, I'm in a daze. And he's like, Molly, what are you doing here? And I guess my best friend's mom had called the school to be like, hey, heads up, this is what happened. And he's like, why are you here? And I just, am like, I have to go to school. And he was like, where's your backpack? And I was like, I don't know. He's like, what class do you have to go to? I was like, I don't know. And he was like, Molly, go home. And so I do remember I walked out of the school and I got to the parking lot. Like I had left my car running. So like that's the mental
headspace.
It's like this headspace that I was in from basically that point through the funeral up until like really we had one moment in planning the funeral. I broke down, but like other than that, like I pretty much was in this daze. I didn't cry. Like I wasn't anything like that. And then the whole funeral, like I was sad. I remember this so vividly, but again, I was like in this almost like emotional shutdown. And it wasn't till we got to the graveside service where they handed my dad the flag from her flag draped casket. And then my friends Drew and Andrew started playing taps. And when taps hit, that is when I like completely lost it. But that's like, it was the finality of it. And so I say all that and I share all that to say that like, it's that gives you a picture of the mental state that I was in. And then once the dust settled, and of course, like anybody who's ever experienced that, like it's this weird, like the time between a death and a funeral is like just bizarre. It's like you don't know what day it is, what time it is. Like everything is just in limbo. And then like after the funeral, all of a sudden you have to just like go back
to life.
And it's this bizarre moment. And the reality is like my dad wasn't really equipped to help me. So like we just kind of went about life as usual. But then it was like my dad and I weren't really communicating. And so I was just like, I had a new boyfriend and I just was like, I'm just going to pretend like everything's fine. And so that became my mantra for years. And then I went to college and it was like, I left my dad at home and college was this chance for me to like reinvent myself. It was like, I'm going to, be everything that people said I couldn't be. And I'm going to just like strive and I'm going to get straight A's. I'm going to be class president. I'm going to be in a sorority. I'm going to, just like, I'm going to do all the things that just like make me feel good and overcompensate for all of my like insecurities and all those things. And I'm going to like bury grief in just striving and seeking success, and then, like I said, and then it just continued on that trajectory to just making more and more decisions that just were over time. It was death by a thousand cuts. It was just these decisions. And so to answer your question really is just, it impacted everything in my life from that point forward.
Do you ever think if my dad and I would have had a more maybe healthy communication relationship, like that would have changed things? Or is it like, I won't even speculate about that because who knows?
Yeah, I have thought a lot about that. I do wonder if somebody had really pushed for me to get counseling.
Whoever it may have been.
Whoever. I do wish, and it's interesting because at the time, like, and I say this, I feel like I have to preface this, like, I love my dad. My dad is the best. He is, he's going to be 80 this year. And he is just like, I couldn't ask for a better dad. But he's also a flawed human being,
For sure. As we are as parents too.
As we all are. Yeah. And so he was doing, I think, in his mind, the best with what he had. And so I don't fault him for that. And also he's a part of the like he's not even a baby boomer. He's a part of the silent generation. And so like that generation in general, it's not that my dad is not the kind of person who's like great at talking through feelings. It's just not their like natural inclination. Because like his dad was serving in World War II. Like my dad was born the day before D-Day. So it's just like it's born into a very different time and culture where they just talking about feelings, emotions, just, so it's not that my dad won't answer questions. It's just that he's not going to offer up the information without being asked. And
Gotcha.
so when I was writing this book, actually, he and I had some really tough conversations that I
Hmm.
probably should have had with him 20 years ago, but I didn't necessarily like know the questions to ask.
Yeah,
And so, he lost the love of his life, but he had been grieving her for 8 years.
I know, right? Like
And
as a
so,
child too.
right.
The reality is like those teen years, we're so selfish. We can't hardly even see
Totally.
anything except for everything revolves around us.
Totally. Totally.
And
And
that's
this
really
is,
hard for parents.
yes, this isn't even like a thing that I fully understood till adulthood in general is like when you get to this point, and I don't know that I have a clear-cut answer for this, but I think everybody listening can understand this. At what point you flip how you view your parents, and that
Hmm.
is like outside of just being your parent and then them being whole, complete human beings
Hmm.
that have their own lives and their own friends and their own past experiences prior to when you were born. Like and I think it's like I'm sure that like Freud or somebody like that has like, it's like one of those like, like stages of development or whatever it is, where it's like when you go through that stage of like, you are a kid, you are a teenager where the world revolves around you, your parents in your mind, their lives revolve around you and everything that you
Hmm.
do. And then really shifting into how you interact with your parents. And so, that shift, I think with me and my dad just happened at different intervals
Yeah.
where he
Yeah.
was viewing me differently than I was viewing him. And we weren't communicating on the same page. We weren't grieving the same way. He had
Mm.
already, like, her death in some ways, like, it was not a relief to him, but it was like he knew it was coming and had known it was coming for so long, whereas it wasn't that case for me. Then when he started dating almost immediately, I was then like, what the heck?
Yeah. And he had been processing for a long time the loss already.
Right. And he and my mom had had hours and hours and hours of conversations about this,
Yeah.
where I wasn't a part of those conversations. I didn't know that she wanted him to date right away. Like, I didn't know that she wanted him to move on and like not be
Mm.
lonely and all that kind of stuff. Like, I didn't know that. So here I am, like, my mom's been dead for 2 months. And my dad's going out on dates all the time.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, And so, like, now looking back, I'm kind of like, Dad, you probably should have been like, hey, you know,
It is an interesting thing though, because it does speak a lot to our really our own journey, like internally, that when do you share more? When do you like, I mean, I'm an oversharer. So my kids probably know more and kick into worry mode because I've told them way too much
mm,
about things that might not ever happen.
yeah,
Is that any better or worse than not sharing enough? Well, who
yeah,
knows,
who
right? It's
knows?
such a hard thing, but I know that shift you're talking about because I look back now and when my house burned to the ground when I was in 5th grade
Oh
and we
man,
lost everything. I mean, car and everything. And I mean, I can look back now and just I cannot fathom what my parents were dealing with behind the scenes that we knew nothing about. Now, all lives were fine, but now as a parent, oh my goodness, I just can't imagine.
right, yeah.
That's
It
difficult.
it is a hard balance to strike, but I think it's taught me. I learned a lot of lessons through it on the other side, where it's opened up, like I said, lines of communication with my dad, in
Mm.
ways like as an adult that I'm grateful that we've now had been able to have those conversations. But then it's given me also a different perspective on how I speak to my children about things, how I
Mhm.
speak to my husband about things. At my friends, all those kinds of things. So it really, I think the important thing is like whenever we do make mistakes or we experience things that were hard, like, okay, well then why did that happen the way it did? And what do we learn from it?
Right. Don't just stay in a blame game of like, well, you could have done this, you could have done that.
Right.
Instead, like, how do I switch moving forward? And
Right.
that is the big takeaway.
Right.
Well, something else that I mean, I don't know. I mean, I didn't know this. You squandered $250 million. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so I knew if you go back, people, and listen to episode 15, you'll know that Molly had a huge like financial freedom journey, but I did not realize it came on the hills. That's the country coming out on me in
The
me.
the hails of it. Yeah.
The heel,
The
like
heels.
your
Yeah.
foot. Is that the right
Yeah, I think so. I'm questioning everything, Amber.
It's true. I did not realize that came though as a result of the inheritance you received and literally like just burning through it all. Like share a little bit of that. And
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
goodness, you get to the end of that and you definitely got to look back and go, what the heck am I doing?
Yeah. Um, yeah. So I do remember that I shared some of this on the podcast. So I want to say a little bit about kind of like the backstory before I share the how. So I became debt free in March of 2012. I didn't share publicly that I had become debt free until the following August. So that was like when I finally was like, all right, I want to share my debt free journey. And so I shared it on my blog. And to this day, like that blog post and that whole series, like was one of the most viral posts ever. Like, because it was kind of at the time, like I hadn't even heard of Dave Ramsey. Like, so he was around, but he was not as popular as he is now. And so this was like really at a time where not a whole lot of people were sharing kind of debt journeys and all that kind of stuff. So that post in particular like went viral. And so then I started getting interviewed on podcasts, and US News and World Report did a study, like did an article in their magazine about me. The 700 Club came to my house and like filmed this whole like documentary. I mean, it was like a whole thing. And so I had shared my financial story in a lot of places very publicly. I had not very intentionally shared how I got there. So I had shared that I got it tens of thousands of dollars of debt, that I was in $36,000 of consumer credit card debt, but I had intentionally left out a pretty large detail that at the age of 21, on my 21st birthday, I received a surprise inheritance for $250,000.
Yeah.
And the reason that I held that very large detail of the story secret, that I kept that from people, was because I was ashamed. I still had carried a lot of shame, a lot of guilt, a lot of embarrassment from it. And I was not at a place where I was ready for people to know the whole story. And I was a pretty baby Christian at the time. Like I had only been saved for not even like a full 2 years really at that point. So I was still like really in the early process of like the sanctification journey, like the forgiveness journey. So I did not share the whole story publicly until spring of 2022.
Wow.
And
so hold on before you go on. I want people here to hear that these kind of things, this is so normal, come in layers. Healing, salvation happens right away. Healing from the way that we function out of childhood wounds, the way that we function out of our own fear and shame, that is what comes in layers in sanctification, right? Like, I mean, that sounds so, are you serious? But at the same time, it sounds like the same story I've heard over and over again from people who've walked with Jesus for decades.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. The reality is there were just, I mean, less than on one hand, less than 5 people that knew the whole story. Obviously, my husband being one of them. I just was so ashamed and I was so embarrassed. And I really had to walk through a lot of healing through that time. And I'll tell you, like, what really was the straw that broke the camel's back and finally, like, opened the floodgates. And I mean, one, I knew that when I was going to write this book, I mean, which I've been working on for a long time, like, I knew that I was going to share it in the book and that I had to share the whole detail. But I had a conversation with God. It was in January of 2022. And I was doing like just my daily Bible reading. And I was in the Old Testament and I was in the story of Joseph and talking about forgiveness and all that kind of stuff. And it was just one of those, like, I don't claim to like hear from the Lord, like where I was talking about earlier. Like, I don't claim to hear like this audible voice, but I can tell you, like, in my quiet time with God, I felt that still small voice of the Lord clear as day.
Yep.
And it was, that I've forgiven you, right? Like the Lord saying this. Like, I've forgiven you for this stuff, right? And like in my heart going like, yeah, like I know I'm saved. I know I'm forgiven, right? And God, that still small voice goes, you haven't forgiven yourself. And I was like, and you like feel it
Oh,
coming.
yes.
And you're
I
like,
100% know.
I was like,
I'm like, can I pick up my phone now and do something different instead?
And so God, again, still small voice, was like, so if I, the Lord of Lords, the King of Kings, the creator of the universe, who knit you together in your mother's womb, who formed you, who knew your name before you were born, who holds it all in his hands. If I, that God, can forgive you, who are you, Molly Stillman, to not forgive yourself? Are you holier than me? Are you higher than me? Are you in more control than me? And I was like, nope.
Yes.
And so that really was like, that was the catalyst where I was just like, okay. And I'm not saying it's not, I don't still struggle from time to time, like the shoulda, coulda, wouldas, but I would say in general, like that moment was like the anvil had been lifted off of my shoulders. And and then I knew that really that the enemy had been holding that piece of the information like in my soul to hold it over me so that the enemy could come in and be like, you remember what you did? That should have been your mom's money, but you squandered it and you made dumb decisions. And like, think about if you hadn't have done that. Think about where you could be right now financially with your family. Think about if you had been done.
Oh, yeah.
All
the
of that.
lies.
All those lies. When the reality is like, had I not made all those stupid mistakes, I wouldn't have hit rock bottom. And I don't know that I'd be saved right now. So I knew that I was to bring it to light. And so I actually preached at my church, our church plant in March of 2022. And that's where I shared it for the first time. And I shared it in front of my church family in a safe environment to where I could really share the full testimony. And I'll say like from that moment, it was like just the such healing to bring that darkness to light. And that the enemy cannot, because now it's like, yeah, I did that.
It's in the light. Right.
Now it's like in a book that I'm like, yeah, I did it. And it was stupid and I made mistakes. And like, what about it?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I mean, so often when we bring things into the light, it's like talking about mental health. Once you stop hiding so hard behind what you're afraid is going to just like make people think different things about you, it's incredible that the healing that can come from that. Although there was a lot of wisdom probably in not sharing it everywhere too.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So that's a weird tension.
It is. It is. And I think it really it has to, like you were saying earlier, like it comes in layers, like healing comes in layers, healing comes in phases. And, and even in this book, like there are bits and pieces of my story that are even just way too tender that are not meant for the world to know.
That's right.
Like I get real, like I share a lot, but there are even, other parts of the story or other things that I experienced that like, I had to be really careful of this balance of like, what is true vulnerability and authenticity and sharing it in a way that is going to be healing to other people and help other people not feel alone, while also like, I have to protect certain parts of the story or certain people or whatever it is. It's a balance. And I think a lot of it comes from just spiritual maturity. And I'm not saying that I've like arrived, but I am at a much more spiritually mature place in the spring of 2024 than I was in the fall of 2010.
I mean, hopefully.
Right.
I want that to be true of all believers.
Of all of us. Yeah. Yeah.
I hope so.
Sure.
Well, so if people who are listening, if you don't follow Molly on Instagram, you should, because she's hilarious and she's just fun to watch. But you'll know that humor is a huge part of who you are. And it's both a gift and has been a coping mechanism.
Yeah.
Which I would venture to say is true for most comedians. Or anybody that has an extreme talent, right? It's both a gift and we hide behind it at times. I knew that you had pursued being a stand-up comedian, but I didn't know you had, like, tried to get on Saturday Night Live and all of that, and so how do you feel like early on you used that more as a coping mechanism? I know at one point that was a pretty dark season of your life prior to Christ, and so, share a little bit of that with us.
Yeah. I mean, being on Saturday Night Live was my lifelong dream. I mean, from the time I was like little, my dad would often like let me stay up and on Saturday
Watch
night
it. Oh
and watch it.
gosh.
Yeah. I mean, I had Gilda Radner sketches, memorized. Mike
That's
Myers
awesome.
sketches memorized, Eddie Murphy, Chris Rock. I mean, I loved it. I loved the creativity of sketch comedy. And so I started writing sketches like from a very early age. And then when I was later in high school, and early college, I discovered improv
Mhm.
and improv is like where I really came alive because in a lot of ways, like improv fueled my sketch comedy. Because it just taught me, I mean, the foundations I still say to this day, like for any communicators, I mean, parents,
Mhm.
if you're in sales, like if you're a teacher, if you do deal with other people in any way, shape, or form, like find a local theater near you and take an improv 101 class. Because just
Okay.
the foundational fundamental principles of improv as far as like communication and listening and support and all those kinds of things are just life skills that I really believe anyone should have. So even if you're not like somebody who wants to like be a comedian, I
Yeah.
really truly I could preach this for I love talking about this, about just how the fundamentals of improv really can help you in so many ways. But so once I discovered improv, I loved it. I loved the adrenaline rush of it. I've never done drugs, like full disclosure. Never been somebody who's ever struggled with drugs, like never tried a drug, nothing like that.
Mhm.
But improv was my drug, because the adrenaline rush that you get from like this spontaneity of it, of like knowing I'm going to do a 30 to 60-minute show and it's going to be entirely made up. I'm going on to stage, like not having any idea what is going to happen. Like, and then when it happens and it's like you're jiving with your scene partners and like, it's just, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, there's just no feeling like it in the world. It is so exhilarating. It's so fun. I just have so many positive memories of my time doing sketch and improv. And so, yeah, I mean, all through college, I mean, I would travel up to and from New York City and take classes at different, training theater or training centers and different perform in different theaters. I mean, I was traveling the country, performing in improv festivals. And, it was just, I loved it. But it also was a great coping mechanism in that like it was really easy to like hide how I was feeling if you're on stage and you're making people laugh 4 or 5
Yeah.
nights a week. It's really
Would you
easy.
crash after that?
Oh, yes. Oh my gosh. And then once I moved to North Carolina, I moved to North Carolina in the summer of '09. And once I moved here, like I lived alone. I would go and I would do all these shows and then like, even hang out with people afterwards. Like we'd go to a bar or a restaurant or something like that. And like, then I'd go home and I would just emotionally melt down because I didn't have to perform.
Wow.
And so that was like, I mean, because scientifically, like the
Yes.
adrenaline, the dopamine rush that was happening in my brain at the time made it really easy to forget all the crap that I was trying to hide.
Yeah.
But then as soon as you get home and you're alone with your own thoughts,
Mhm.
it goes to a dark place real fast. I would go up to New York and I would be in the green rooms of these theaters where like these famous comedians would be. I would look over and, I watched famous comedians like doing lines of
Yep.
cocaine.
Yep.
And I just would sit there and I'd be like, is this what I want my life to look like? Again,
Mm.
never done drugs. And so I was not ever tempted by that, but it was like realizing that some of these people that I really admired and like looked up to were just as broken as I was.
Yep.
And I'm telling you, it takes you to a really different place
Mhm.
mentally. So it was both, I mean, humor, and I believe in the power. I mean, Proverbs 17:22, a joyful heart,
Yeah,
laughter does good
it
medicine.
does.
And again, scientific proof that like hope and laughter and smiling like is actually healing to the
Yeah.
body, while also it
Mhm.
cannot be the end all be all.
Right.
And so
It
it was.
can't be for the accolades of other
Mhm.
people.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it was a tricky balance that I was trying to strike, that in the end I wasn't winning.
Mm. Well, let's close with this. You did end up meeting Christ
Mhm.
and have been on that journey since what year did you become a Christian?
Fall of September of 2010.
So, all right, 13, almost 14 years.
Yeah.
And so now, having walked with Christ for almost 14 years, yet still, loving things like improv and being a communicator, which can also bring its own highs and accolades that can get us in trouble, but also are gifts. Getting out of debt, writing this book, all of that. How would you say that as a Christian, you're using those gifts really for the glory and for the kingdom versus the way that maybe you were using them when you were younger and you weren't walking with the Lord?
I mean, that right there is my whole mantra. And in the summer of 2011, I went on my first mission trip. So I hadn't even been a Christian for a full year. I went on my first mission trip, and the like theme verse for the trip was 1 Peter 4:10. For each of you has received various gifts, and you're to use that gift as a steward of God's grace in its various forms. You're going to use that gift to serve others as a steward of God's grace in its various forms. And that verse became very quickly my like lifeline, my life verse, because what's great about that verse is it's not just like a pretty verse that's great on jewelry, or like it's my license plate. Like it's my, like all of those things.
Coffee mug.
It's what's powerful about that verse is when you actually zoom out. But in chapter 4 in particularly, because context matters. But that verse in particularly is in the context of suffering. And so that in the midst of suffering, in the midst of hardship, in the midst of adversity, in the midst of persecution, in the midst of hard times, that God has given each of us gifts.
Yep.
And those gifts we're actually to use not for ourselves, not for our own benefit, not for our own glory, but for the purpose of serving others, because we are conduits of God's grace. We are stewards of God's grace. And if you actually really think about that word steward, a steward is someone who temporarily possesses what someone else owns. And then you are to give account for that thing that you temporarily possessed. You're to give account to the owner of it. And so if God owns all of what we have, if everything we have is a gift from God, then I'm temporarily stewarding whatever gifts he's given me, resources, relationships, my children, my marriage, my church that I'm serving in, this message in this book. I am a steward of it.
Yeah.
And so I got to give account to God for what I'm doing with it while I temporarily possess it. And so that has been the lens through which I have seen everything over the last, 13, 14 years. When you look at things through that lens, then it's like, all right, it's not, Lord, not for my glory, but for yours. I love, briefly mentioned BSF. I know that you also love BSF like I do. I love that at the end of lectures and at the end of doctrine talks and stuff, like our teaching leader always ends every single message with "To God be the glory." And that is something that I started employing. And like, anytime I ever get a chance to like preach at a church or speak somewhere, like I end my message with "To God be the glory," because I don't actually at the end of my book, I wanted the last words in my book to be "To God be the glory." So at the end of my acknowledgments, the end of the book says "To God be the glory."
Well, Molly, thank you. The book is If I Don't Laugh, I'll Cry. And I am assuming people can get it in all the places. But what is your website if they want to visit there?
Yeah, stillbeingmolly.com. And then I'm on social media, Still Being Molly, wherever you get your things. And if you like the sound of my voice, I do read the audiobook, which is real fun.
I love it when people read their own audiobooks.
It was real fun.
Thank you.
I did a lot of fun, kind of like little cool things in there, tried to make it kind of interesting. So if you're into audiobooks, you could definitely listen. Like I sing in it. I do character voices. It's a whole thing.
You're
so
awesome.
It was really, really fun to record. And then I have a podcast, Can I Laugh on Your Shoulder? And so all those things. So Amber, this has been so much fun, and you're an amazing interviewer, and I just love you so much.
Thank you so much, Molly. I hope you found yourself both laughing and deeply pondering the transformative work of Jesus. If while listening someone came to your mind, go ahead and send them a text sharing this episode with them. You won't regret it.
Thank you for listening to the Grace Enough podcast. Tune in next time.